Okay, everyone, welcome. So we don't have anyone to introduce us today, so we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Lisa J. Very happy to be here, recovering codependent.
I'm Chris J., a recovering codependent. Happy to be here.
Yes, and so we are continuing our series, Traditions in the Real World. And today we're going to be talking about
Traditions with families.
living the traditions with our families, correct. Do you want to do any housekeeping things before we start?
Sure. Why don't we take care of that?
Okay.
Obviously, one thing we want is everybody to feel safe. If you have any concerns you need to step away, please feel free. If you have any, urge to take care of personal business, please close your video, just shut off your video, step away, do what you need to take care of you. We want everybody to feel safe.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I believe you are first.
Sure.
I'll scoot over.
Okay. So, part of the reason that we were motivated to do this series is because the traditions are so valuable in our recovery lives. And we wanted to, see what do the traditions look like in the real world. We have a group that we read the traditions every meeting. And then we have business meetings and we kind of do reviews and say, you know what, maybe we need to do a little bit better here and there according to these traditions. Well, how does that look in the real world? Today we're going to look at how the traditions have impacted Lisa and I in our families, because we know that CoDA, who has been around since 1986, and AA many years before that, they needed the tradition so that the 12-step recovery groups didn't implode. And considering how codependency, deeply rooted from families of origin, applying the traditions to our family relationships, that's where some real healing can happen, where relationships can improve. So we figured, just to give you a quick highlight, these are two pamphlets that really jumped out at us when we were doing our preparation for this workshop. And the way we decided to set up today's workshop, first we're going to take a look at some of our relationships that weren't the healthiest, and on one side they're still the same, they're still not healthy, but on the other side, by practicing these traditions, what's been going on up here has gotten better. So for me, I've got three examples. I have a sister-in-law that I had during my step work. She was one of the people on my resentment list, and I actually had an opportunity to make an amends to her, many years ago. And for a while, that relationship had gotten healthy. And unfortunately, about 3 years ago or so, 3.5 years ago, the relationship between her and my brother went bad. And it's been very toxic for quite a number of years. And of course, there were things building up to the change in their relationship. But because I had been working on the traditions, one of those pitfalls that comes into family relationships a lot is triangulation. And that was a landmine that this time around I was able to navigate my way through. We have one tradition that talks about unity and talks about, group consensus. we also have another tradition that talks about autonomy. And one of the things that the balance with those two traditions for me really helped me out is that my relationship with my brother is one relationship. My relationship with my sister-in-law is a different relationship. And when I'm communicating with my brother, even if he needs to vent out about my sister-in-law, that's one-on-one. That stops with me. I do not turn around and stick my nose into it and go run to my sister-in-law. This is what your husband is saying. That did happen to me earlier. He had a previous marriage, I had a previous marriage, and man, did that blow up in my face, because not only was I not doing a good job mediating between the two of them, B, it ended up blowing in my face between my first wife and me, because it's like, how could you do that? And it ended up that my wife and the sister-in-law went at each other. Triangulation is horrible in a family situation. And the traditions help me this time around keep my nose out of their business. The other very difficult relationship for me was with my father. My father and I, for a while, as an adult, I tried to live with the examples. I grew up with a contentious relationship with my father. And when I was 18 and left home, I tried to be an adult, and I tried to say, okay, there are some good things and some bad things about who I am. Some of those good things are from his example. Some of those bad things are from his example. And I tried on my own to hold on to the good and let go of the bad. In 2001, he chose to exclude my brothers and I from his life. And all of those resentments that I thought I had walked away from came pouring right back. And for the better part of 15 years, I was in a state of turmoil, and the anger and animosity I had for my father soured so many of my current relationships. I got into recovery in 2014, and I did the work around it. And this workbook right here had so many different reminders of how to place my that energy that I had. There was letting go of the past. There was accepting the good parts, and accepting that even if I didn't understand why my father chose to exclude me from his life, he has a right to make that choice. I don't understand it, but I can accept that that's where it's at. I actually did manage to get to a place of forgiveness with my father about 5 years ago. And he was on my list of amends. I found out last week that he died. I found out last week that he died 19 months ago. And his second family decided not to let my brothers and I or the rest of his family know. And I found myself in a grieving space. The grief was not traditional grief. I had a spot of anger years ago, and I had a spot of denial that I struggled through, but I had also gotten to a place of acceptance that, if God was going to, if a face-to-face amends was going to happen, I was going to trust that God would make it happen. And while I don't get a face-to-face amend, I still have the opportunity to do an amend. I hope it's to his gravesite. It may not be. I may have to go to the place that I had a final loving interaction with him and offer my amends there. But the tradition has definitely helped me to keep that in perspective, that it may not be my plan, but I can accept that he's got a choice in this relationship too. It doesn't have to be the Chris way. The relationship between my father and me was detached but loving. And doing my step work and doing the tradition work helped me get there, even though I still didn't have that face to face. Even though he didn't want me in his life, my relationship with my father did improve by doing the tradition work. So I feel like I've talked about some of my challenges, so I will leave you and let you.
I don't mind if you want to finish.
No, it's okay.
Okay, that's your choice.
Mhm.
Hi, everybody. Lisa, recovering codependent. I'd like to share that Chris and I have our CoDA birthdays this month, our CoDA anniversaries. Mine was on the 16th, 34 years.
It's tomorrow.
And Chris's is tomorrow. So I love celebrating with our CoDA family. So thank you. You guys are awesome. So I wanted to share about a pretty significant set of relationships that didn't respond so well to my recovery. It was actually my mom and dad. So when I came into recovery, the relationship was pretty broken to begin with. And there were a lot of things that contributed to that. It wasn't, I don't think it was all me, but when I got into recovery, I believed it was all me. And so as I began to work my recovery, and I did make amends to my parents face to face, I was still doing a lot of, work in recovery, and I was attempting to bring these principles into my interactions with them. And, some of the things that we learned from the traditions and from the steps too, there's a little bit of overlap there. But I think about unity, I think about equality, looking at flexibility and adaptability, that's a big one. Avoiding controversy, really making an effort. The big one was clear communication. I don't know how it was for y'all, but in my family growing up, we didn't speak directly about things. You kind of danced around stuff and tap danced, and you didn't really talk about what was really going on. Like, the big elephant in the middle of the room is kind of the cliche that we throw about in the rooms, at least when I first got into recovery. And so I have a very distinct recollection. I have been married more than once. And in one of my previous relationships, we were planning the wedding and my parents were all involved in that. And I remember there was a whole group of us in the room, and I had asked my sister if she had purchased her dress because she was going to be part of the wedding party or whatever. And my mother just lit into me and just got really shitty with me. And I was like, what the hell just happened? I mean, I never saw it coming. And it turned out that my sister was having some difficulties and challenges financially, blah, blah, blah. My sister couldn't tell me that. My mom had to jump in and defend her and do that weird triangulation thing. And it was just crazy. And so I came in honestly trying to bring these principles in and trying to be different. And I am the only person in my family that got in recovery. The only one. I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room right now that is the experience of that. And it can be challenging. And this was an example, a very concrete example of that. And to give you a sense of who my father was then, right before I got into recovery, I remember it was probably a couple of years before, we had been estranged for some time, and I was making an effort to reconnect with them. And I remember my father looking me in the face saying, I don't have any problems. You're the one with all the problems. That was the mentality that came along with this. Now, even though he had that mentality, that did not stop me from doing what I needed to do in my recovery to make amends, etc. That didn't stop me. And frankly, they didn't really change so much, because as we went on, and I had children in recovery. I didn't have any kids beforehand. And so my family started to build my own personal family in recovery. If I was at my parents' house and my sister was there, they would completely ignore me and ignore my children and just pay attention to her. And it's really interesting because at that time, somebody else had to point it out to me because I couldn't figure it out. All I knew is I would go there really excited to see them, and I would leave, and it would take me 2 or 3 days to get over it. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And then, it was pointed out to me. And eventually, due to the work that I was doing, I made a very challenging and difficult decision not to be in relationship with them anymore, because it was for my own personal safety and for the safety of my children. And that was a tough one. That was a tough one. And how does that fit in with the traditions? Really good question. So when I look at the principles of the traditions, I think about autonomy. I think about primary purpose. Think about principles before personalities. And I also think about, not necessarily related to the traditions, but personal responsibility. If I know something, if I have information, I get to make a decision based on that information. And at that time, I was also learning about how I hadn't been kept safe as a child and had been harmed. And in turn, now I had these 2 children that it was my responsibility to keep them safe and to keep them safe from harm. In addition to, why would I want to bring them around people that were going to ignore them and harm them? Right? So in essence, what I want to share with you is that all those principles that I just talked about, they weren't about my family of origin anymore. It was about my family that I was responsible for today. And that was so incredibly difficult, challenging, empowering, higher power, God-centered. There were so many different things that went with that. And probably one of the hardest things, I took a lot of crap for it. A lot of people didn't agree. They thought it was wrong. I had to face my sibling, because she was like, what the hell? And I basically lost most of that side of the family for the rest of my life. My mother died about 10 to 12 years ago. And much like what Chris was talking about, for me, with my mom, I didn't realize it until I started doing the work and processing her death, that I had hoped that, I would have an opportunity to talk with her, and I didn't get to do that. And then my father just died about 2 weeks before we found out about Chris's death. And just to keep it very simple, my father was the perpetrator. Just going to leave it at that. And it was a very mixed sense of relief. And I had forgiven him a long time ago. I fully believe that he was most likely not the same man that he was before. And I started to doubt myself. I started to doubt my decisions that I had made, until I sat down and I did the work. And I do inner child work. And so I did some inner child work around it. And I was reminded of why I made that decision, because I had a lot of different critical voices going off in my head. And I recognize today that even though I made an effort to take these principles with me into the relationships with them, those principles still serve me, because much like Chris said, they didn't change. Our relationship didn't change, but I did. And that's, in the end, all that I could impact and all that I could do. And I don't regret any action that I took during that time when I got into recovery, because I believe that I did what was the right thing to do for my family today. And so with that, we would like to open it up to all of you. And we recognize that we're not the only ones that may have experienced something similar where we took these principles into our relationships with family members and maybe things didn't go so well. Maybe things didn't work out the way you thought they would. And we'd like to hear from you if you have any stories that you would like to share, etc. All right, everyone. Well, welcome back. Glad to have you with us. I'm going to turn it over to my partner here, and he's going to do the next section, start us off.
Get it started.
Yeah, you on.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was thinking about during the first section here, family relationships are unique in that we have such a long history of interactions. We have got hundreds and hundreds. When I think about where I was with my father, I mean, obviously I had at the time that he chose to exclude me from his life, I had 25 years, times 365, just such a long history. And one of the reminders in this book is to live in the present. And that was something that I wasn't able to do when my codependency was raging. When I think about some of the relationships that I have that have not changed on the outside, that's some of what I recognized is that, for years when I was stuck in my resentments and I was stuck in the past, the relationship wasn't healthy. And when I get into recovery and I start doing making these healthier choices, I'm getting myself to living in the present instead of the resentments of the past or the fears of the future. So being present is a much better place for me. Being present with some of my family relationships, where the other person is also ready to be in the present, that's where it's loving. That's when the miracles start to really happen. Now, I have my older brother that when I first started recovery, he was on my resentment list. He was one of my 4 big triggers because he just pick, and he had a long history of picking on his middle brother. And it would infuriate me. And I think back to some of my choices on how to even the odds with my larger older brother. There's even an example where I pulled a knife on my brother. And I look back at that event. He was a senior in high school. I was a freshman. And on the bus ride home, you gotta do this when you get home. And I'm like, you're not mom, you're not dad, you're not the boss of me. I'm a freshman. First time I've had my own room. I just want to chill for a little bit before I do my chores. And he's just picking. And I go to my room and he blocks the door open. He's 3.5 years older than I. He's bigger. I'm a scout. I find a solution. I get a blade. And my mom gets home in the space of about 6 minutes, which is normally like a 13 to 15 minute ride. She gets home in about 6 minutes flat. I look back at that time and, I was just doing the best I could. And, he's not the same big brother from 17/14 to now. He's got different experiences. He's not living in that moment when he's picking on me. And if I stay in the past, then I'm not getting any better either now. When his wife and he started struggling, he came to me and we were talking, and that communication, that one-on-one communication, he had a history. He had a history of cutting me off. I would say something and then he would jump in and finish my sentences, which is another pet peeve of mine. But you know what? Because I have been working with the traditions, that's one of the things that I was able to do. I was able to set that boundary. I said to him, respect it. There was an opportunity when I was in the middle of a sentence and he cut me off. And it's like I had checked in with HP before I started. And it's like, he has this history, help me stay calm. And I did. I was able to stay calm. And it's like he finished my sentence for me, and then he waited for me to continue. And I waited. And I waited. And he's like, oh, aren't you gonna say anything? And I said gently, I said, okay, so it's my turn now. It's like, I am trying to not finish other people's sentences, because when it happens to me, I get frustrated, which of course he apologized, but I was able to, this was, in my opinion, this was attraction. I didn't come out as a finger pointing, judging, saying, how dare you, or any of that. I was able to be gentle and compassionate with him. I wasn't able to do that on my own. I had to work my program of recovery. I had to keep higher power with me to do that. But this is an example where me practicing the traditions with someone else who is not out to get me, our relationship has gotten deeper and more trusting. The same thing with my mother. When I look back at my family of origin, I got a double dose of codependency. I got the aggressive in your face from my father, but I also got the compliant and avoidant from my mom. So when I read the patterns of codependency, oh, I was pulling from both sides. I had a good 85-90% clearance rate on my codependent characteristics. So, working with my mom, again, she's done her own healing, and she is in the moment. So when I have a family member who is not holding on to those resentments, not hanging on to those fears about what may come down the road, there's real chance for a blossoming and a flourishing of a nurturing relationship. And it's happened. I mean, I felt I had a good relationship with my mom before I got into recovery. Practicing the traditions with her, it's enriched both of our lives. She has also picked up on some of these traditions and is practicing it in her own life with her church family and with friends of hers that I have an opportunity to witness. And it's a beautiful thing to see the promotion of these principles take hold and spread. So it is so worth it, even when there's a healthy relationship. I think there's always opportunity for advancement, for more progress. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to my wife.
Thank you, love. So I have some interesting relationships to bring up in this section. And really what the emphasis was about were bringing the traditions into family life and how it worked, how it became something that was positive and good. So I'm gonna start with my sister. She's 1 year, less than a year younger than I am. And she is my reminder of what I could have become had I not got into recovery from codependency. And I have struggled with this woman for years. There have been times when we didn't talk to each other. There have been times where she said I was a horrible sister. I've heard a lot from her and taken a lot from her. And when we were growing up, there were times when we did okay, and then there were times we weren't. And it was such a contentious relationship. It really was. And when I severed the relationship with my parents, I didn't talk with her too much in the beginning. And then she decided she was Switzerland. She says, I don't have an opinion. And I said, okay, that's good. And so we continue to interact and have a relationship. And you know, what the principles of the traditions taught me was that I didn't have to change her or fix her. And in fact, how could I have a relationship with her just the way she is? So this is a woman who will come into the room. There'll be 3 or 4 of us sitting there, and she'll shut off the light. She walks about halfway through, and then she turns around and goes, did you want that on? That's what she does. And you know, can I love her anyway? Yeah, I can. Can I accept her where she's at? Yeah. And you know, it was the traditions that taught me that. And so I'm going to ask the question for you. I'm going to say, well, how did that happen, Lisa? How was it that you were able to accept this person? How did you learn how to do that? Well, have any of you sat in a business meeting with a whole bunch of codependents? You ever been to a conference where we're all trying to do the business of CoDA? It's an amazing opportunity to learn some skills about how to accept people where they're at and listen to where they're at, right? Yeah, I see a couple of hearts running around there, yay. And not take it personal, right? And so what promotes that? Unity. So we're all there for the same purpose. My sister and I, we have a relationship. We've known each other. I've known her all her life, literally, right? That's not something to just be cast aside. And so I look at that as unity. I treat her as an equal. I don't know if we ever had that problem when we were younger. I think I'll tell you how we got dubbed. She was the pretty one and I was the smart one. And so that was a real thing for a long time. And, you know, I look at my sister today and she is smart and she is creative and she has all these amazing qualities and she could be a pain in the ass. I'm not going to deny that, but she's also an amazing woman who's overcome a lot as well. And I had an opportunity where she called me once. She was in the middle of a crisis and she said, can you come and help me? She has never done that in all her life. And I did. I went to my boss. I was in the middle of some heavy duty stuff. And I said, look, you know, I wouldn't come to you if it wasn't like this. And I showed up for her. And it was gratifying and it was being of service. And I've never forgotten how powerful that was. And I think that it was a mending and a healing in our relationship. And it's all a part because of these traditions and how they've been demonstrated in my life. I also think about sponsorship. You know, sponsorship, I don't know about you guys, but those traditions, they play a big role when I'm working with somebody else. And they gave me some tools to help me in my relationships. And so I'd like to transition over to my children. I have 3 sons. They're all grown now. And I started parenting these kids in recovery. So you can imagine that I'm acutely aware of how screwed up my history was. And I'm like, how the hell do I not do this to them? I mean, I knew what not to do. I really knew what not to do, but I didn't know what to do. Because just doing the opposite isn't always the greatest either. Like I grew up in a very strict household, right? Very dictator-like. It wasn't even a benevolent dictator. It was just dictator. And so to come from that and then maybe have that pendulum swing the other way, I kind of knew that wasn't okay either. And so there were a combination of things. Of course, I did some outside work, went to parenting classes and such. But, you know, I really looked at sponsorship. And some of the things that I did as a sponsor and that were done for me through sponsorship, me being a sponsee, helped guide me as a parent, and especially when my kids got older, right? So instead of just, okay, I did yell sometimes. I'm not going to pretend that I didn't, but there were times when I was able to pause and not yell at them, and we could have a conversation. And so I have an example when the internet was still kind of new, and my son decided to put out on social media his name, address, and phone number. I took exception to this. I could have gone in and yelled at him and said, "What are you doing?" Well, I didn't, I thought about the way that we do things today, right? And when I say we, I'm talking about us as recovering people and the way that I do things today. And so I remember sitting him down and having a conversation with him. And what I got to explain to him was this action impacts the whole family, not just you. And so I think about what we learn in CoDA and in the traditions. We have autonomy, right? We have the ability to make choices for ourselves. Unless that choice is going to impact what? CoDA as a whole. When we talk about relationship, if it's going to impact the relationship, in this case, it impacts the family. And so I looked at him and I said, you're right. You're an individual. You get to do the same. But now you've put the whole family in danger. Now you've crossed that line. And when I presented it that way, I saw a shift, had another situation with another son. Okay, so all three of my sons have been suspended from school before. I thought I was raising hoodlums. They're not. They all grew up to be okay, but they all got in fights. They all did this thing. I grew up with all sisters. I didn't know about these things. We didn't do stuff like that. So this was all really new. So a couple of my sons also had the police knocking on my door. And so one of my sons was out late at night. He was caught with a young girl who was way underage. She was like way underage. And he was in high school. She was in junior high, I think. And so, of course, I had to go and I had to get him and bring him home. And the next day we had that conversation about, where he was at, what he was doing and stuff. And he said, well, you did stuff, because he knew my story. He knew that I had done some things. And I said, son, it's a different world today. You can be branded a sex offender at this point, because that's the world that we're in today with the difference in age. And I remember seeing his eyes get really big. And I said, yeah, that's the difference. And so instead of screaming and yelling at him and sort of those things, I had this opportunity to talk about what was going on. I also look at my youngest son, who, so I told you about my father, that he was a perpetrator, haven't had any relationship with him. Well, I had a couple members of my family reach out to my youngest son and say that my father wanted to meet him. And so my son called me and said, I'm going to meet your dad. I'm not asking for permission. I'm letting you know. And it was like a punch in the gut. I got off the phone. I was just overcome with emotion. The steps kicked in and I went, okay, I'm powerless. He's a grown man. He can do what he wants to do. And then I look at these traditions and I look at how all three of them grew up with me in recovery. They all heard all of these things. They went to meetings with me. They heard things. And my son, in his own way, they're not in recovery, was letting me know that he was acting autonomously. And he was letting me know so I wouldn't get a surprise, which was, respectful and kind and loving. And I was able to let him be autonomous. I didn't question his loyalty as would have happened with me growing up, because that was a big thing about being disloyal to the family, these sorts of things. And again, I saw the traditions working in my life. It's been quite a journey. I've got one more son who deals with mental health issues. And I'm going to talk about attraction versus promotion. So I never once told my kids what they should or shouldn't do. I've known that sometimes they've had some issues, possibly with substance abuse, possibly with codependency. And what I made a choice to do is, instead of telling them what I thought they should do, and who they should talk to or not talk to, and who they should leave or not leave. I practiced my recovery in front of them. And so at different times, my kids have called me knowing that they could call me and knowing that they could talk with me. And I remember one of them telling me, yeah, Mom, I know that if I have a problem, I know where to go because I saw what you did, and his father as well. But my oldest son deals with mental health issues, and he's got some other stuff going on. And what I've noticed is that he's willing to call and talk with me when he's kind of spinning out. And what I get from that is that he knows that he can be himself and that he can be safe there, if that makes sense. And where did I learn that? Well, I learned that from all of you in meetings. What do we do in meetings? We have the no crosstalk. We have these traditions that guide us throughout our meetings. I learned it from all of you, how to do that with them. And I believe that it's attraction that allows him to call me and say, hey, I'm not doing okay. Do you have time to talk? And being with Chris now, sometimes he'll talk with him, which is an even greater gift, because for him, I believe it's important for him to be able to talk with a man and be able to talk about man things and not have to talk to Mom about man things. You know, he can talk with another man. And it's been a tremendous gift. His father died of alcoholism. He didn't have a dad that could show up and do those things. So it's an incredible gift. I also want to talk about my current marriage with Chris, that he and I did the traditions workbook. While we actually did it during our courtship. We lived about 1,700 miles away from each other. And so when we weren't visiting with each other, we were working this 12-piece relationship toolkit, and it became the foundation for our relationship. And okay, if I talk about today, just a little bit. Okay. So today I went to Chris and I asked for a conversation with him, because that's what we do. We have an agreement that if we want to talk, we just walk up and say, hey, can we have a conversation? And I told him, I said, you know, a lot of things have changed since we first got together. And let me tell you, a lot of stuff has changed. A lot. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Just a lot has changed. Life continues to happen. It's not permanent. There is a level of impermanence that's just awe-inspiring at times. And I asked him, can we work the relationship toolkit again? Can we take a look at it again from where we're at today? And to be able to do that, and that I would even have the willingness to go to him and ask him, is huge, because in my previous 20-year marriage, when I requested that, he laughed in my face and said, are you effing kidding? And so it took a lot of courage for me, and I'm grateful that I did. For me, that is a result of the work that we did to lay the foundation for our relationship. And I know that it doesn't always go pretty and wonderful and perfect. I have made amends to my husband more times than I would care to admit, but it's the truth. I have, because I get triggered and shit comes out of my face and I just go, okay, well, I'm making amends for that. But it's not just the steps, it's also the traditions that remind me, you know, we're in this together, and these principles that come out of the traditions are what guide us. And I'm grateful that in our family here, we have these to guide us, and we have these to stand on. And I'll end mine with this. When I first got into recovery and I was in treatment, because treatment was really big when I got into recovery for codependency, we had a man who came and spoke to us, and he talked about where we put our faith. And as recovering people, before we got in recovery, and I'll speak for myself, many times I put my faith in things that they had no business being in, usually in people or in situations or principles that weren't stable. And of course, people are not stable. Don't put your faith in me, please, because I change. But what he said was these steps and these traditions, they don't change. They're principles that don't change. And it's a place to put our faith. And he encouraged all of us that were listening to him to put our faith in principles that don't change. And I can honestly say, even though I fall down and I get up and I fall down and I get up, I put my faith in these principles that do not change, and it pays off. It may not pay off the way I wanted it to or I thought it would, but it pays off. And so with that, I am done. So we will open up for
Yeah, some
some
sharing.
shares from you.
Yeah, let's hear how it's working in your guys' life.
Okay, it is question and answer time, and you have a couple people that had asked some things, so
Yep.
please go.
So I'm really attracted to your second question about the primary purpose.
Oh, is that how that works? So I get to do the make amends part,
Which,
right?
well,
I do it a
I
lot.
was really attracted. So
You do that first part, yeah, go primary
Okay.
purpose.
the tradition 5 is primary purpose. And this was actually one of the more attractive things to me when Lisa and I were getting together, because what I recognized for myself was that I didn't have one. Okay. Now, there was a primary purpose for CoDA, which was really good for when I was there in a meeting. And I remember that, as unhealthy as it was, like when I was in college, I was in, and my primary purpose was to get that commission. And as long as that was an option, it was very clear and easy for me to make choices. But then I lost that opportunity and I was adrift. So when my primary purpose of this world was no longer an option, later it was my one marriage. One of my relationships was my primary purpose, and then she didn't want to be in it anymore. When I lost a primary purpose of this world, I was lost. So when I was with Lisa and we got to tradition 5, we took a pause and I had to take some time to figure out what my primary purpose was. And then we got back together and then we figured out our relationship primary purpose. And that has helped me immensely. And one of the beautiful things is that my personal primary purpose is not in conflict with our relationship primary purpose. So I'm a big fan of tradition 5, and I'm actually I put in my application to do a workshop at a conference this year about primary purpose. So it's worth the work.
And what conference is that, honey? You want to
That
tell
would
me?
be the International CoDA Convention that happens after the CoDA Service Conference at the end of July in Texas. So you can register online. You don't have to attend in person. So if you go to CoDA.org, I'm sure you can find a link to sign up at Eventbrite and get involved with either observing the CoDA Service Conference, participating in the International CoDA Convention afterwards for the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's a wonderful event. You get a big dose of recovery if you want to join.
Okay,
Okay,
thanks.
your turn.
Making amends. If I remember correctly, you wanted to know how we do that? I'm working with the sponsee right now, and she's on step 2, and she messaged me, or we talked, and she's like, I'm ready to make amends. And I'm like, you're on step 2. But so that's the first thing I always say. We have those steps in order for a reason. So make sure that 1 through 8 are done. And when we get to step 9 isn't just walking up to somebody and saying, I'm sorry, right? So what it looks like to make amends, if I may, I'll share that, the other day I had some things come out of my mouth, and it wasn't the what I said, but the how I said it. And my conscience really got me. It was like, Lisa, not cool, no bueno. So I got to go to him and make amends. And so I got to go to him and say, and I'll kind of paraphrase, the way I spoke to you was not okay. It's not who I want to be. And I talked with him about, what I would make an effort to do, which is really pause and consider what I want to say and how I want to say it before I just let it blurt out. And what followed that was an opportunity for him to share with me how he felt and how it impacted him. And that's what an amends can look like. I am a huge fan as a recovering codependent that I'm not very good at knowing when I'm supposed to make amends and when I'm not. And when in doubt, check it out with somebody. I used to apologize for all kinds of stuff that was none of my business making amends for. The first list that I ever made, it was long. And I watched my sponsor go, nope, nope, okay, nope, 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 nope. Like more than half my list was gone because I was taking responsibility for things that weren't mine. So I highly encourage recovering codependents. Check in with a trusted CoDA friend, sponsor, whatever you got. Check in with somebody before we rush off. And I told you how long I've been in, and stuff still comes out of me that I just look at myself and go, okay, I'm not recovered. I am recovering. And I have no problem being transparent with all of you that I still mess up sometimes. And it's not the fact that I mess up. What defines my character and who I am is how I deal with it. And that's what I believe. And that's what CoDA recovery and recovery in general has taught me.